Hey, this is Steve Halleck of TickTocking.com, and I've got a really cool watch. Man, you know, there's certain things that just get the TickTocking offices buzzing here, and one of them is a new horological machine. So today I've got one of the coolest for you. This is HM9, the Flow, the craziest, baddest machine to date. Little bit of HM4, a little bit of LM2, a little bit of Max Booster goodness, and you get this HM9. So stay tuned, we're going to go deep in it. All right, so HM9. This is the road version. There's a road and an air, and I'll get into that a little bit later. First, let's talk about the movement. So the movement is actually kind of similar to LM2, Legacy Machine 2. And if you're not familiar with that one, I'll put a link down in the description to my review of the LM2. But the main feature of the LM2 and the HM9 are two balances that are connected via a central differential. So this idea was first explored in a wristwatch by Philippe Dufour with his duality, and it's still quite rare to see. The only other one that I can think of is Grubel Forsey has a take on this, but it's an extremely difficult to achieve but very kind of cool and effective way to get very accurate rate keeping, because you basically have two completely separate rate keeping mechanisms, and then the differences between them are averaged out via this differential here. So obviously in HM9, guys, this is taken up a notch in terms of its aesthetics and the movement architecture. This is a completely in-house, ground-up design movement where you have these big balance wheels that float here kind of in these pods. They are on these very nicely finished steel bridges. Let me see if I can zoom in and get you a good shot here. So you can see the balance wheels are big. These are quite high-polished arms holding them. They're kind of suspended like in a Legacy machine they would be, and then they flow in to this differential system here. Now you'll notice, because of the shape of the glass in all three sections, there's this kind of very cool distortion that occurs, and it really gives this sort of machine-like spaceship feel to the thing. Everything gets a bit bigger and magnified, and it's basically totally awesome. But one thing that most people don't realize with these is, because they get distracted obviously by how crazy they are, but just look at the level of detail and craftsmanship as we go through. Everything is finished to the nines, and it shows. So the next thing that's difficult here is somehow you have to have a movement that is in this kind of general two-dimensional plane, and then you have a dial, which it's a driver's watch dial, which means you read it straight on the side of your wrist. But somehow the time telling has to go perpendicular to that plane, right? Now that's not easy to achieve, and in this case it's done right down here. If you can see these gears, there's an actual kind of conical shaped gearing that, let me see if I can get this in here, turns the gears vertical basically. So now let's talk about the case. The case is made out of titanium and is extravagantly finished, going between these kind of satin finished sections and the high polish, and then the entire back is again this high polish. There you can see those gears that I was speaking of earlier pretty well. But anyway, the case is sort of unlike anything that anyone's ever seen. The closest thing would be the HM4. So I like to think of the HM9 kind of as a cross between the HM4 and the LM2. But you'll see when I put it on the wrist later that it sits very compactly, especially for its size. And part of that is due to the ingenious spacing of the lugs. So you'll see this lug comes all the way under here, under the crown, a good, several millimeters in from the back of the case and even more from the back of the crown. And then this one is all the way inboarded, way beyond where the time dial is, so that you don't need a monster wrist to pull this off. And that's one of the real secrets with mb&F. Max is a very normal proportioned and classy guy, and he designs watches that he can actually wear. So you'll never see one that is, you need to be The Rock to wear or something like that. And the HM9 does a really great job of that. Now, one of the challenges with this case was getting it to be water resistant, and this actually is 30 meters water resistant. Now, obviously, it's not made to swim with or whatever, but the fact is that a lot of people will obviously wash their hands, get caught in the rain, and also one of the mb&F's largest markets is Southeast Asia, where it's very humid. Now, this movement, as we've just gone through, is very complex, extremely costly to make, and so you don't want humidity entering the watch and ruining the movement. So it is important to have a level of water resistance. And in order to do that, they had to make an actually patented three-dimensional gasket that goes through everything and then flips vertically to here and is sandwiched in to the case. You can see these screws that hold the case together. So it's pretty awesome. Awesome technically, not just in the movement, but in the case, obviously, here. So how does it work, you may say? Well, it's actually a fairly simple watch after you get past all the obvious complexities. Manual wind. You have the crown right here. Really nice wind to it, too. It feels great. Wind it up, get those big balances moving, and then one pull out. Set your time. And that's it. You just have hours and minutes, which is kind of the poetry of mb&F. It's sort of like, how complex can we make a watch that only gives you the hours and the minutes? It's pretty awesome. So yeah. Here's your run-of-the-mill simple watch. So like I said, there are two versions of the HM9 so far. Maybe there will be more later, but even in this titanium one, there is a version called the Air and a version called the Road. This is the Road version, and the differences are in the dial and in the finishing of the movement. So here you can see the movement itself is in sort of a rose gold plating. On the Air version, that's a ruthenium gray. And the Road dial harkens back to sort of vintage cars and their speedometers and tachometers, whereas the Air dial is very similar to the HM4 dials, more of an aviation theme. Otherwise, the pieces are identical. Different people can have different preferences. This one, I can say, is extremely cool. All right, I'm going to show you the watch on my wrist, and as you can see, it really fits quite well. I have a very normal sort of 7-inch or so sized wrist, and it's extremely comfortable. The watch is much lighter than you would expect it to be because it is all titanium. It comes on this calf leather strap that's really quite supple. This one's brand new, so it's a little bit stiff on me, but fits pretty well out of the box, and I would imagine if I wore this for a week, it would be very comfortable. It is on the spring-loaded deployant that mb&F uses quite a bit, and they work really well and are generally really comfortable, of course, with this signature double battle axe rotor motif into the buckle. You can see time telling is super easy. It is a driver's watch, which means that, as you have your hand on the wheel, you can look right at your watch to see the time, which of course shows 1029. I'm sorry, 129. Whew, it's been a long day. And you really get the sense of the movement of these two balances when you have it on the wrist, which is awesome. You know, even like this, you can see them fluttering off in the distance, and then you turn up and can see all of it. But the three-dimensionality and the movement and playfulness are apparent really at every angle. It's not nearly as monstrous as you would expect. I'm wearing kind of a sweatshirt right now, and you can see that I can put it under and still read the time, and it's kind of coverable. I wouldn't necessarily wear it under a dress shirt cuff, but if you were wearing a jacket or a sweater or something like that, this watch is totally wearable and really, really, really comfortable. Of course, it really comes into its own in short sleeves where you can show it off a little bit. So that is HM9 Flow. This is the Road version. This is really one of the coolest watches on the planet. And just imagine the kind of balls it takes to put your company's well-being on the line for projects that are this insane. A completely ground-up movement that can only be used in this case, in this way. Millions of dollars of research and development, hand finishing to the nines. It's just, it's mind-blowing what these guys do, and Max is really one of the best in the business.